Good evening. Welcome to the third of our Christmas word studies. So far we've looked at joy and waiting, but tonight I want to consider the idea of nearness. Of all the concepts associated with Christmas, for me this is the most festive. For Christmas is, more than anything else, the celebration of Emmanuel, God with us. The joy of God being close enough to actually touch, to hold as he is born. In the Old Testament, God had always had a desire to be with people. He walked with Adam and Eve in the garden. He met with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Hagar and Moses and Elijah. He even had a tabernacle made, a tent where the people, they could see this tent. They could actually point to this tent that was there in the midst, in the middle of all of their tents in the camp. God with them. And Christmas takes us a step further, for instead of just simply dwelling in a tent in what man had made, as we're told in John 1:14, he instead came as a man to dwell with mankind. Christmas then is that remarkable time when the one enthroned in heaven came to the dust of the earth, where the all-powerful one became a baby who relied on his mother to wrap him in the swaddling clothes. Now there's many texts in the Bible that talk about God meeting with people and that great intention of his to see the chasm that lay between us because of sin permanently traversed. However, for tonight, I wish to look at a beautiful text that I think becomes all the more poignant at the incarnation. The nearness, as I'm talking about, and that's the nearness of the blessing, particularly in what is known as the Aaronic blessing in Numbers 6:22 to 27. This is what it says in that text. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, Thus you shall bless the people of Israel. You shall say to them, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So shall he put my name upon the people of Israel, and I shall bless them." And as we see there in verses 22 and 23, this is a blessing for all of the people of God that God himself communicated to Moses. In other words, this incredible blessing comes directly from God. It's not the hope of the priest or the yearning of the people. Rather, God looks, and as we read this text, God looks at you. He says, "I would bless you." It's quite something that God looks at you, that he's looking at you now. The circumstances of your life, the unique pains and difficulties and needs, and says, "I would bless you." Yahweh stands as the guarantor of this blessing. We see his name repeated in this role 3 times in verses 24, 25 and 26. We read there, Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. He is the one who pours out as he sees you in your need. It is once again important that we see the name of God here rather than just simply a title such as Lord, because this is a person and this is someone who has a track record, a history of being faithful in relationships, of keeping promises, of doing what he says he is going to do. In fact, and with that context of who he is, the blessing doesn't really make any sense. So it is Yahweh that guarantees the blessing. But what's in the blessing in verses 24 to 26? Well, the 3 verses of the blessing in 24 to 26 work together towards the same theme, the blessing of God and what that looks like. In Hebrew and in English, it works its way to a crescendo. In Hebrew, the first line, Yahweh bless you, is just 3 words, followed by 5 words in the next line and 7 words at the end. In fact, it's so well crafted that even the number of consonants were carefully ordered, so that we have 15, 20 and 25 consonants as each of the 3 lines of the blessing are presented. This matters. That little attention to detail really matters, because what it does is that it gives the effect of building up to the last line with each statement of increasing wonder. Each of the 3 statements works its way up to the end, with this crescendo of wonder. And each of the 3 statements does this by presenting to us an action of God and what happens as a result. So we see as he blesses, we are protected. As he shines, we receive grace. And as he lifts up, we have peace. So let me take the time to explore what each of these mean. So in verse 24, we had Yahweh bless you and keep you. The action of God here is nearness in action. Written as bless, literally the Hebrew says, may Yahweh kneel or crouch down amongst us. The idea is that he would come down to our level. Much as when I wish to talk to my children, I often need to physically come down to their level. But what a thing to ask. What a thing for God to promise. That the one who by rights sits in the throne in the heavens comes to the dust of the earth. That the one who by right lives surrounded by what is holy would come to us who are not. That the one who by right receives perfect praise comes to us in order to give what we need. The scale of the blessing is breathtaking. For we are asking, we are receiving this idea that God would be among us where we are. The effect of all this action of God and the effect of God here in this verse is that we find ourselves kept. Literally, it talks of protection, of God planting a hedge around us. For if he is amongst us, what then can threaten us? If he is among us, really among us, even our own self-destructive tendencies are diminished. Verses 25 to 26 take on the blessing. Now, let's be honest. If it just stopped at the end of verse 24, that would have been enough. That would be more wonderful than we could imagine. And yet that's just the opening line in a text that will continue to swell with wonder. Next, we have Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. This next action, having come down to our level, is for the face of God to be shining on us. To have God kneel and to have his face towards us is a truly momentous thing. To this though, we should note that the face is shining. The shining face is a common Hebrew metaphor, simply meaning that someone has a good disposition towards another. When it comes to God, the shining face is often equated with salvation. We see that in Psalm 80 on 3 different occasions. We have this line, make your face shine upon us that we may be saved. The idea would be that God is the source of life, like the sun is to a plant, and without the light there can be no life. Without the shining there is no life. Now you may imagine that the opposite of a shiny face, as it were, the shining, would be a cloudy face, a thunderous face. That's what we have in Proverbs 16 verse 15, a cloudy face. Yet even then, storms bring rain. Even the cloudy face can bring a blessing of sorts. No, the opposite of the shining face is the hidden face, when God won't even look, as it were. When he hides his face so that people can no longer find him or see him. When he hides his face, then the people's lives are at stake. To have God's face hidden from us is to live like in Micah 3 verse 4. Then they will cry out to Yahweh, but he will not answer them. At that time he will hide his face from them because of the evil that they have done. So to have the face of God shining on us is to have God himself. It's talking about the nearness of God, as God crouches down bringing life and rescue. And as we have in this verse, grace, the Hebrew term there, chanan, is a word that describes the mercy of God, usually coming from a place of pity. So it describes God seeing us as we are, where we are, and being moved. It means when I talk about nearness, it's not just that God is physically near to us, but there's an emotional engagement so that his compassion compels him to look at us and show mercy. This is what blessing looks like, that God would not be distant, but would instead look upon us, that his face would not be hidden, but instead that he would gaze upon us and be moved. And what a blessing that is. There's nothing that the world could offer that would even equate to a fraction of this wonder, that the creator of heaven and earth would be here with you, with me. That he would see us. He would see us, really see us, and be moved by what he sees and act in compassion and mercy and grace. And yet there is more to this blessing, because these two have been building up to the crescendo of the blessing in verse 26. Yahweh lift up his countenance to you and give you peace. The word countenance is just another word for face, and in the Hebrew it is actually just the same word as we had in the previous verse. The difference here is that the face is lifted up. So there are actually three things to note about how this adds to what we have previously. Firstly, the lifting up of the face to you serves as a reminder that here we have a God who is willing to be seen. We have a God here, Yahweh, who would be face to face with us. The difference from the shining face that we've just had and the face here is the difference between a God who sees everything and the God who is willing to be seen. The Hebrew title for that, El Roi, it's a title that was used by Hagar to encapsulate this idea in Genesis 6:13. Hagar, just as a reminder, she was pregnant and she was on the run and she had nowhere to go, and she finds herself in the middle of a desert. And as whilst she's in that hopeless state, that God comes to her, proving that she's not abandoned, providing hope for her future and that of her descendants. So Hagar, in this moment, she gets this incredible insight as to who God is. But having met with God, God names him El Roi, based on her experiences. And as the context makes clear, it's a title that means that God saw her, but he was also willing to be seen by her. It's a momentous revelation. Here's this unloved, unwanted, desperate woman, comforted by the one who crouches down to her as she is abandoned in the desert. He is the one whose heart is moved by her plight and says, Hagar, I care. I am here with you. You know, the God who sees is great, but the God who is willing to crouch down, the God who is willing to be moved is wonderful. And the God who is willing to be seen, the God who is willing to be there with me to provide hope for where I am at. I mean, what could compare to that? Now, we add to the second point, for as well as the close proximity of a relational God discovered by Hagar, the lifting up of the face to you is, as I've already noted, the crescendo of the two previous actions. So the three actions go together. They act in one movement. God crouches down. He shows his face and he lifts up. The picture is very similar to what I do when I see my daughter. Who, you know, being quite young, is a lot shorter than me, and as she comes running to me, I have to crouch down and we come face to face, and I lift her up in my arms, smiling at her with my face shining. The three actions here that we have here are reminiscent of a parent scooping up the child that he loves and that he is smiling on. However, there's also a third point to be made about the lifting up of the face. And I think this is especially in the context of nearness and takes us back to what happened that first Christmas. You see, when we think of a blessing, we can very often have the wrong end of the stick. We can imagine that a blessing is simply something that God sends at a distance. He sits in heaven and he just kind of sends a blessing down to us, I don't know, by some sort of special delivery service. But the blessing should not be understood as something which simply comes from God. It is actually what arrives with God himself. To be lifted up is to be in the presence of God. Not to have a blessing sent to us, but to have him. And as a result, the blessing comes. It changes what we understand as blessing. For it's not that he sends to us some of the vain things that would charm us, some material item that we're pleading for, and we imagine that's the blessing. Instead, what is being asked for here is that God himself would come. And that changes everything. Nothing can remain the same. As like a whirlwind, he sweeps in and sweeps us up. The Aaronic blessing is not just wondrous because we may receive some blessing, because we have some sort of cosmic Santa Claus that we go to with our list, and if we've been good enough, we may get what we want. The Aaronic blessing is wondrous because the source of all blessing takes hold of us in his arms and gives us peace. Now, this is what happened at Christmas. God came down to our level. He shines his face towards us and he is seen. Mercy, grace and peace arrive in that small town. The angels cry out in Luke 2:14, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased." Peace for those who have had the face of God lifted up and shining on them, who find God dwelling with man. And so what a reason to look back as we do and to celebrate. And yet it is also a reason to look forward and celebrate all the more for the God who'd been intent on walking with the first man and woman in the garden, who met with people through the centuries, the one born on Christmas Day would meet us now. And one day, in fullness, meet us in glory. Because of Christmas, we can know right now the nearness of God and look forward to the day when we see him face to face. This then is why we say Merry Christmas.